So coming from the US with a background in automated financial transactions, it's been interesting to come to Germany and work for the last 18 months on delivering a programmatic sell-side platform for premium video inventory. Heard a lot of interesting things today that go along with my experience as well, and I just want to pass on a few of the learnings that we've had over the last 18 months to try to make some understanding in the market as to where some of these issues can be solved. I think the first thing to talk about is we've heard so much today about real-time RTB. Is that real-time bidding? Is that real-time buying? RTA, real-time advertising, programmatic guaranteed, programmatic premium guaranteed, programmatic buying. There's a kind of a gap in our understanding from a language perspective on what all that means. And I think some of that confusion came from, when it first started in the US market, real-time bidding came as an outgrowth of the systems that were already providing, second price auctions for search. So RTB was second price auction. And then we started to realize as the United States market didn't really work out too well that maybe real-time bidding is a little more than second price auction. Maybe it needs to have access where we can get the efficiencies of programmatic trading without being tied into a financial model that requires an auction of inventory. Because maybe not in all cases it's a second price auction. Maybe it's a first price auction. Maybe it's guaranteed inventory. You've heard all of that today, so it's very interesting. So the first piece of learning to take away is that the separation of the commercial aspects and the delivery of the transactions is critical. And I think it's what the publishers today, it's what the content owners today are worried about. If everything is an auction and the commercial aspects are tied into the automated delivery, you have a real problem, because the way you do business is now tied into other platforms that are accessing your inventory programmatically. So it's one of the key learnings, and it's one of the things that we found almost across all of our partners. The digital world has had real-time advertising since ad servers were invented. If you talk to the TV broadcasters, one-to-many signals, that's not real-time advertising. You serve one commercial across all the TV sets. In the digital world, we've always made on real-time decisions for ads. It's just not been tied to commercial aspects necessarily. It's been tied to priority and campaigns and type of ad formats. And now we've introduced another metric to make decisions on, and that metric is the price. So one of the things about the models is publishers really need, especially premium publishers, to be able to decide how they're going to do business with their clients without being tied into the technology that's required for the efficiencies of automated trading. And I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from at the moment is, it's not so much that markets like Germany they're too diligent to take it on, they have to think about it too much, it's that there are no options. If you get on one of these platforms, you're tied into the financial model of the platform. Now, the US market's adjusted, right? So we see private marketplaces, we see the ability to do these private deals and guaranteed inventory, and that was the adjustment to this commercial model not working. But that's pretty much 2 or 3 commercial models. So now if you accept programmatic trading, you're tied into one of these 2 or 3 commercial models. How do you innovate in your business? And from a video perspective, it's even more important because the cost of production is very, very high. So as Philip Missler said this morning, the refinancing of content is critical to the publishers. It's not just about an impression that I can sell right now. It's about how do I finance the content that drives the users to my site. So that's a very important distinction. And I think the markets in Europe, specifically the German market as compared to maybe the Netherlands, is a good example that the microeconomic structure is very different. So in a market like Germany, you have dynamics like really strong agency networks that have a lot of buying power. And so the ability to force types of transactions, whether it be programmatically or guaranteed or private commercial deals, is very heavy. Whereas in other smaller markets, sometimes you have distribution of that, and it creates a true supply and demand curve. So that's a very interesting thing. I think the second thing we learned, which is very philosophical in nature, but I'll relate it back to video and programmatic as well, is that the future of brand advertising cannot remain one that's based on assumption. And it's kind of like, it's the definition of an insanity, right? Which is, if we keep doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result, that's when people say we're insane, right? So you see right now that the complexity and fragmentation of the market really creates a problem, especially in the video inventory. Before it was YouTube on one side and 1,000 sites on the other side. Now you have device different devices, the consumption model's changing. You have fan pages on Facebook. So instead of Facebook being one site, now you have literally 1 million sites you can syndicate your advertising to against certain kinds of content. So it's that fragmentation that's created this problem. I think maybe as early as 2 years ago, everyone said, right ad, right person, right time. And sometimes in branding, right context. Well, now it's right ad to the right person or people in the household at the right times of the day, because there's multiple contacts, on the right devices in the right life context, which may be Facebook, it may be email. You've heard a lot today about cross-channel attribution models. So what do you do with all that? How do you follow the complexity of that? And for the publisher, and for video especially, premium video inventory, it creates a problem with how do you evaluate the value of a contact. For performance, it's relatively straightforward, not the attribution side, but the value of the contact. But for branding, it's very difficult. And then you have the context of the video, you have all of that stuff that happens, which makes it even more difficult. So we'll talk about, to get to some of the earlier conversations, you heard Sasha talk about big data. And the interesting thing there is programmatic access to inventory suddenly allows us to collect data at the amount that we need to start evaluating these contacts, to start understanding and taking that data and applying it with new metrics to figure out what is that? What is when I reach someone on an iPhone and in a pre-app situation, maybe you're playing a game, is the pre-roll before the game more valuable than the pre-roll between the first and the second level? I mean, those are the kinds of metrics we now have to evaluate, and we have to feed that back into the loop, because ultimately, that is what funds the content, the quality content production, which is what gets people to the sites, which is what you sell to the advertisers. So I think I heard one of the speakers say it's all about the advertisers. Well, that's not completely true. It's just as much about the content, because without the content attracting the people, there wouldn't be any place to advertise. So transparency of data is key. I think I've heard 4 times today that someone's talking about the upcoming Firefox release, where Firefox is switching to default to no third-party cookies allowed. What's interesting is, if you're a buyer of inventory, that's something you don't want to happen. And if you're out with your friends, anytime someone says, oh, I block cookies, you always say, well, why would you do that? You get better ads, things you might actually want to see. Well, now let's talk about the sellers to the buyers. In many markets, Germany is specifically one of those markets, the buyers are telling the sellers they can't collect any information. So if you talk about yield optimization, in a situation where there's not 100% demand for the supply, why wouldn't you let the sellers collect information so they could give the buyers the impressions they really want? Just like the buyers get the consumers they really want to buy the products. It's the same exact argument. And so transparency of data has to go both ways for it to actually work. And right now, I think the definition of transparency in programmatic buying is simply, you show me what side I'm gonna run, I'm bidding on. That's the level of transparency we're talking about. Very important thing, I think. And then finally, I've heard a lot today about programmatic buying and when is it gonna happen and when is it gonna be here. I think we have to change our mindset. It's not so much of the destination as it is actually, it's a journey, right? It's the first step, because we have to provide solutions to get inventory on these platforms, to connect the demand side and the buy side. Ian talked about the connection through programmatic guaranteed. It's a very important concept, because without that connection, there's no liquidity in the market. And all of us that deal through programmatic access, whether it's second price auction or some other financial mechanism, it's all about liquidity in the market. I think for us on the video side, it's specifically relevant because we're looking at the huge amounts of advertising budgets that are spent on traditional broadcast TV. And over the next years, it could be 3 years, it could be 15 years, we will enter a space where all TV is delivered in a one-to-one addressable space. So as opposed to a mini broadcast where I don't know who I'm reaching, whether it's internet or not, it will be one-to-one addressable, which means the way we deliver advertising today will apply to TV as well. So ad serving, programmatic access, all of that. And for us, it's a scale issue. When you talk about the cost of delivering TV advertising versus online advertising, well, of course, the cost of online advertising is higher, but a lot of that is because it's a scale thing. Someone, maybe an online media planner, a seller sells per head on average in, I don't know, in a market in Asia, they sell 2 million euros worth in a year. A TV buyer, planner, a seller probably sells 20 to 40 million. So of course the cost is higher. So for us, it's a scale. If we can attract that inventory to these platforms and we can manage it with the data and with the liquidity in the market, it creates a whole new ability for us to use data, for us to grow the efficiencies, for us to do everything that we've talked about today. And I think the last thing to think about here is that it's not so much a fear in the market that prevents this from happening. It's more of a, let's not lock people into specific solutions that are geared towards, if you're an SSP, of course you're pushing for multi-bid architectures. And if you're a DSP, of course you're pushing for complete transparency. I mean, it makes sense in the market. Let's figure out a way that the owners of the inventory have the flexibility to implement the commercial relationships however they wish with their partners and still get the advantage of the efficiency of programmatic trading. Thank you.